What's up? Welcome in. That time of week again. It's the Sooners on SI podcast, episode 262. Not from a hotel lobby with a youth hockey team screaming at us. I am Ryan Chapman, all the way back in Moore. We made it. Hoover up in the 918, the great John Hoover, our fearless leader. Have we recovered from our weekend on the road in the Grove?
We're back from the Grove, but just barely.
I think I wanted to be in the Grove at some points on Tuesday because we're not going to mince any words here, guys. No hijinks early on. We got to hop right to it. We're going to talk to Brady Trantham, our good friend of both of us, here in a little bit, kind of get the pulse, get the vibes, because sorry, we're not previewing Maine. That's not what we're doing here. But it's Maine week with Oklahoma coming in 4-4, another 3-game losing streak for Brent Venables, and 3-game losing streak by double digits, first time since 98, all that stuff, which means going into the Brent Venables press conference with Maine ahead. There wasn't a lot of Maine to be asked, which meant that Brent Venables fielded a bunch of questions. He got the state of the program question. He got a job security question, Jackson Arnold's future, a bunch of stuff top to bottom. He spoke for an hour and 6 minutes. If you missed any of it, go to the YouTube page, John Hoover Media, pull that bad boy up. You might want to put it at 1.25 speed just to get through it. But if you do that, you're going to miss Oklahoma crapping out offensive linemen and Brent Venables talking like a normal human being does instead of like the very, very guarded coach speak stuff. John,
It
just
was something.
taking a step back, the whole thing, what was your big takeaway or a couple of takeaways coming out of the 66 minutes we spent with Brent Venables on Tuesday?
It was just what you referenced. I mean, he dropped. Brent has a very good public-facing sense of decorum, right? He doesn't always speak like a regular person, right? Especially when you're on camera and everybody's got their microphones on. Well, he did yesterday. He dropped an S bomb, dropped some other colorful language. He even said "dang" once. So we got the unofficial count at something like 12 or 13 invectives, colorful invectives at one point or another. So what a performance by Brent. But he came across to me as very energetic. It was like he got some good sleep on the plane or something on the way back from Mississippi. I don't know what it was, but he came across as much more engaging, much more energetic in his press conference yesterday, Tuesday, than he has in a lot of them this year. And again, I don't know why that is. When you're on a 3-game losing streak, do you like flip a switch and say, I got to win back the fan base? And here's the first step is being effusive and engaging in the press conference. Obviously, the first step is going to be going out kicking the crap out of Maine. But beyond that, where do you start? And I think he started well. I think he had a really good representation yesterday.
Yeah, and to be clear, we only bring up like the language Brent used, not because who doesn't care? I don't care. We get it. They're coaches, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They get to the practice field, cuss people up and down, whatever. Nobody cares. It's just different. It's a very, very usually he's
Yep.
so polished and basically it's like that he knows he's on the radio, so he doesn't use all the words you cannot use on the radio. Same thing with Eddie and I. A commercial break, the conversations Eddie and I have are very different than the 15 minutes when we're on. You know what I mean? Like it's just the whatever. So it's not that we care. It's just different. I think it
It
just
was
shows
different.
you that he was more worried. It's not that he's inauthentic. It's just that when your back's against the wall, he doesn't care if under his breath he talks about Jackson Arnold and S. You're the quarterback of Oklahoma. Who cares? He's not as worried about that. And yeah, I did think I've compared him a lot to 2022, mainly because I guess contrast is a better word. We went into a bunch of those press conferences. They were very low energy on Tuesday, usually, especially after Oklahoma had stacked up losses. And it was a lot of the same questions of can you simplify the defense, stuff like that. And I think that in hindsight, looking back, you can almost tell that Brent Venables at that point kind of believed like, this is year one. We can't dumb this thing down anymore because these guys have to run the defense here the next 2 or 3 years. And it was almost like he believed that there was nothing else that could happen. This is me retroactively like assigning meaning to. Now I think he's a little bit more fiery because he fixed the defense, right? It's a lot better group. He's shown that like, okay, I can make that thing get better. He believes the special teams is better. He talked about the offense from year 1 to year 2 became more efficient by all the efficiency metrics that I think that right now he's going, I think in his head, he's probably thinking, I made a bad offensive coordinator hire and everybody's hurt on the offense. And if I can fix the hire, get people healthy, get that thing back and going, I don't think that Brent Venables feels like he's overwhelmed or anything like this. I think he's just like, it's not good enough. He tells us that, right? He tells us over and over, even when he's asked about, oh, the running game was better. He's like, it was better. And he'll talk about it. And the end of his answer is, but it's not good enough. And
Yep.
that's with everything that he does is when they don't win, his answer is like, this is getting better, yada, 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 but it's not good enough. And so I think that's maybe where that extra spunk, extra energy comes from. Even when the first question out of the chute, Eric Bailey asked him about his job security and his meetings with Joe Castiglione.
Yeah, I didn't hear the words abomination and embarrassment coming out of the Ole Miss game like you did the South Carolina game. So that's an
Progress.
improvement, right?
Progress.
That's progress, I guess. He's and here's the deal too is Brent, let's be honest, he's still evolving as a head coach. He's still learning on the job training. No other way to say it. He's figuring this thing out as you go. What do you do on offense when your top 5 wide receivers are basically out for the year? What do you do? How do you respond to that? Well, you might have to fire your offensive coordinator. You might have to install a mid-season switch at the quarterback coach, right? You've got a guy now dedicated to coaching quarterbacks who's actually coached quarterbacks before. You bring up a freshman walk-on wide receiver and give him as many reps as he can stand. I didn't see a lot of substitutions. The thing about wide receiver is you do a lot of running at wideout. And as you do a lot of running, you get tired pretty frequently, right? And when you're in football team and your wide receivers are tired, you tend to sub them out. Go back and look at the offensive rotations at Ole Miss. Those guys aren't being subbed out. There wasn't a whole lot of subs going on. Carry-on came in, Kearney and Zion Reagans came in, but it was those first 3 guys, and with a lot of Bauer Sharp flexing out and being part of the solution. The point being, what do you do? How do you fix it? How do you approach it? You stick those dudes out there and you let them get as many reps as you possibly can. Same thing with the offensive line. Offensive line's a disaster. Oh my gosh, how are we going to approach this? How are we going to fix it? We got a bunch of guys here who either have never played or they have played somewhere else and maybe weren't that good, or they're coming in here and there's no chemistry and they're learning how we play at this level. They're learning how to play against SEC defenses. Well, as long as there's nobody else hurt, like there was on Saturday, they had to make adjustments. But as long as you've got those 4, 5, 6 guys in there, play them every rep, play them every snap, get them in there and they were better. They were better. 1 sack in this first half, 1 sack allowed in the first half. Now that we've had time to go back and review everything, 1 sack allowed, and it was by the redshirt freshman backup who came in for Jacob Sexton. That's pretty good. And then the second half, they had allowed technically, I think, 1 sack. And then those last 3 possessions, last 3 drives, it was sack, incomplete pass, sack, incomplete pass, sack. 3 straight drives. Like, okay, so what are you going to do about that? So Brent is absolutely still learning and figuring this out. He's got new challenges this year that he probably never seen in coaching before. In his 35 years as a coach, he's probably never seen this many or this type of hurdles to have to cross before.
Yeah, well, here's the thing though, and Brent is kind of uniquely positioned. This is the one thing I'll say. He at least understands that it's Oklahoma and no one's crying for Oklahoma, and
Yeah.
he's like, all throughout he's been like, I'm telling you, not to say this is an excuse, this is a reason that things are the way it's happening here, and here with the injuries, and it's our job to overcome that. But I'm just telling you, you know what I mean? It's one of those things of like, you don't have to believe me, I get it, but this is the thing that's happening. At the same time, we need to be better, which is a good thing. He got, for the first time really in his career, at least his head coaching career, the direct, you still talk with Joe Castiglione. What are those conversations like? That was what Eric Bailey asked him, and then George Stoya asked him. This is not the first time that he's been asked a version of this. It was a different version in 2022 about how do you still have belief in your methods when you're not getting the results. That struck a different tenor in 2022 though, because it was year 1, all that stuff. He didn't run a bunch of people off, like, stuff like that. What'd you make of how he handled the first time that he's kind of been asked openly about job security that I can remember, and then also kind of like how do you still have that belief in year three when you're getting your doors blown off basically every week except for Auburn, and this game was a lot more competitive. It ended up being a two-possession game, but Oklahoma was ahead at halftime and in it in the third quarter until they weren't.
Yeah, I was actually fairly impressed, I guess you'd say, with how he handled the job security situation. The question about Joe Castiglione, and he said, "Yeah, we talk frequently. We still meet on a weekly basis." He said, "And talk." I was impressed in that he made it clear he went to Joe Castiglione and told him, "I'm making a change at offensive coordinator." It wasn't a situation where it was, "Hey, Brent, can you meet me at 10 o'clock in my office? I've got some questions for you. What are you going to do about your offensive coordinator?" Well, what do you think we should do? He went to Joe and said, "I'm making a change at offensive coordinator." That's one of those big boy decisions, right, that we've talked about in the past, that a head coach has to make, and that Brent Venables has apparently, if we take him at his word, that he made. And in terms of did he get a vote of confidence, he said expressly, "I'm not going to give you what we said, the intimate details of the conversations," but he said, "Yeah, absolutely," in terms of that vote of confidence from his athletic director. And he said that Castiglione's got a good perspective on things. He knows he's, think about it. Joe was part of the Holy Trinity, right, of Boren, Castiglione, and Stoops, BCS, for more than 16 years. That trio was together making decisions at the top of the food chain at the University of Oklahoma. So he said Joe Castiglione's got a lot of perspective about alignment, um, how to get in line with what the head coach wants, what the president wants, what the fan base obviously wants. I think he comes out of that conversation, the most recent conversation, probably feeling better about his job security. I'm just taking a stab here in the dark, just guessing. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't have sources who were in the room, but I think he comes out of that with a 4-4 record, 1-4 in conference play in year three, probably thinking he's, got a little leeway. He's got a little runway to get this thing off the ground.
Yeah, I was very interested in not necessarily the job security question, but when he was asked about his belief in things, I thought he brought up some great points, which are totally fair, and it often doesn't get talked about in this big conversation because I think we're locked in the 2024 season and the disaster of the offense. But Brent Venables talked about, like, if you look at the offense from year one to year two, it was explosive in year one and finished in a good spot at the end of year one in the way of counting stats, like total offense, stuff like that, but not where they wanted to be in efficiency. And it did get more efficient from year one to year two. Their special teams have gotten more efficient from last year to this year. This year, the defense has gotten better every single year. So that's all stuff that he pointed to, which is 100% correct. And I think that's totally fair. My counter would be that the offense is now worse than the defense was when he inherited it and took it over. So, like, if you're going to if you get roses for the good stuff, you have to take the bad stuff too. And an awful offensive coordinator hire now that and that's hand up. I think all of us were like, I see the vision, I see where it works out. It didn't work out. We were all wrong on that. But you got to own that, and Brent Venables has. But he talks too a ton about the culture, and he's right. Like, guys aren't giving up, things like that. They're fighting. Just look at like the fourth quarter and some of the lack of tackling effort OSU had against Baylor. That's what it looks like when things maybe aren't as good, a ton of belief. But I also laugh because hand up, Brent Venables talked about, like, there might be people on the outside that don't care about the culture stuff and all that. And that's fine. He's like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but the stuff that I see, the stuff that I care about, I kind of had to laugh in the front row because I was like, I'm the guy that's hand up. Like, I don't want to hear about culture ever again. You're 4-4. This is Oklahoma. Culture doesn't, like, culture matters behind the scenes. Yes. In year three, if the best thing you've got is culture, you are going to get fired.
Yep.
And he's not going to get fired at the end of this year unless they lose to Maine. I think he's earned the right to make this offensive coordinator thing, or make this hire, all that stuff. But I've not seen anything that indicates to me, John, that whether you get Big Jack saw development or stuff like that, that suddenly this thing's going to get turned around with just one offseason under an offensive coordinator, that they're like, this same schedule, you flip it around next year, you get marginally better and you're 7-5, is going 6-7, 10-3, where you lost to Kansas and Oklahoma State after beating Texas, not even in the Big 12 championship game. Then you go 5-7 or 6-6 with a bowl result, and then a 7-5. Like, is that good enough? No. Like, I don't care how good the defense has got. You should not get a fifth year at Oklahoma if that's your progression.
Yeah, there's no doubt. This offensive coordinator hire is huge because in 2025, I think we all agree that Brent's going to be coaching for his job. That runway that I talked about will be shorter if next year he's coaching for his job and they pull out another 5, 6, 7 win season. I want to go back to a quote that he said where he was referencing the first half of the Ole Miss game. You know, Ole Miss comes in top 5 in the country preseason. Number 18 after losing a couple of 3-point losses. He said it was 14-10 at halftime. OU actually led, which blew our minds. Everybody in the Oklahoma media, we're all standing around, walking around the press box going, what just happened? What were we looking at out there on the field? Where has that team been? Brent said yesterday, he said, if we do that, we can play with anybody. We can beat anybody that we play against. He said that may not be popular for people to hear. That's true. We're close, right? He said everybody wants to find negative in all of it. That's cool too. But I know what I know. I'm not wrong, and that's affirmation of that. But we've got to get better. I mean, that's a guy that's talking. He's not talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's talking out of realizing here's what we're capable of. We should be able to get there. We've got to get better to be there. I like that whole thing. I know what I know, and I'm not wrong. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of, for me, the double-edged sword of the Venables era so far in Norman is if you go and sit in that press conference, and if you, I don't know if people, when you watch the YouTube video on, the YouTube page, John Hoover Media, or you watch it at OklahomaSoonersOnSI.com, I don't know if you get the same, like, the energy that Brent Venables kind of gives off. And, like, in the middle of the press conference, you sit there and you're like, I believe in what this guy's saying. I see why guys run through a wall for him, all that stuff. And then by Thursday or Friday, I'm just like, okay, now that I'm not sitting in the room with them, this team sucks. They're the embarrassment of the SEC outside of maybe Auburn. And that's because Peyton Thorne and Hugh Freeze have therapy sessions together every single Saturday. Like, this team is a joke for what building of 3 years to get to the SEC, and you're not in the game at halftime against Tennessee. You beat Auburn, woohoo, you want a cookie. Kentucky's the only one that can't beat Auburn. You get pantsed by Texas, pantsed by South Carolina, and you're in a tight game for a half, and then Ole Miss just, Brent Venables' words, not mine, dominated Oklahoma in the third quarter. Bad football teams get dominated coming out of half, and this is what this team is. I just, the farther away I get from, like, when we talk to Brent Venables in person, it feels good, and then every other time, the other however many hours throughout the week, I'm just like, talk is cheap, man. And Brent Venables knows that. It's a results-based business in Oklahoma, and the results have been way below what they need to be. I don't know how he squares that, or how you square that circle, but that's why they're in this spot.
It is. One of the things they talked about yesterday was having self-awareness. And I think they realize, we're not what Oklahoma's standard is. The standard is the standard, and we're not there. I think he acknowledges that the team recognizes that. But if you take each game in a vacuum, let's do the whole course of the season, 7 games, 8 games so far. The team's not good, obviously. Each individual game in its own vacuum, I think you can break it down and you can assess and you can say, why did this one go so bad? Why did this one go so bad? Why did this one turn? And you start to assess, okay, well, there's no receivers. The offensive line was dreadful. The quarterback made 3 catastrophic turnovers. Pick your game there, right? Each of those games, if one of those things happens differently, you can go back and go through all the supposition you want and say, maybe the team plays better in this circumstance. Maybe the team plays better if Nick Anderson and Andrell Anthony and Deion Burks are healthy, or Jaden Gibson comes out, or the new tight end doesn't drop a pass on third down or jump off sides. Every game has its own little ecosystem, and every game can be self-contained. But then you start stringing those games together, and you realize, yeah, this is not a good football team. They had a bad game in Stillwater last year. They had a bad game in Lawrence last year. Lost both of them. They were able to come back, recover, get better. This team's not able to do that. They have a bad game, then they have another bad game, then they have another bad game, then they have another bad game.
Yeah, it's just it gets back to what do bad football teams do? Find ways to lose games and find
Yep.
ways to shoot themselves in the foot. And really, up until and here's like the hallmark: the two things, like not every Bob Stoops season was a 10-win season. Most of them were. There are seasons where you get absolutely decimated by injuries. It happens. Just look at 2009. And while Brent didn't have, 99 through 2008 built up, that you can have a bad year and go, okay, we can point to the injuries, stuff like that. The 2009 team, at some point, it got a smidge better as it went throughout the season. It wasn't great, but that was a bunch of young guys, and they slowly made some progress. Up until the first half in Oxford, I couldn't point to where is this thing getting better. The defense is forcing less turnovers. They're making more mistakes as they're trying to roll the dice. The offense looks more lost against South Carolina than they did at any point. So that was maybe the moment in Oxford that maybe you can turn back and go, they finally got the offense in a better situation, which is not under Seth Luttrell. And maybe they turn the page. And if they get better the rest of the year, even if it doesn't translate to wins against Missouri, wins against Alabama, wins against LSU, I think that's where I might be able to take a step back and go, okay, well, you had all this stuff, you had the wrong hire, and they own that, and maybe it can turn the corner. And a lot of that starts with Jackson Arnold and Kevin Johns. And before we get over to Brady, one last thing I would hit from the press conference, Hoove, is Brent talked about it Monday night. He said he thought it was the best game Arnold had played at Oklahoma yet so far. He got the direct question from Barry Trammell about, do you believe Arnold's going to be back next year? How much of that is trying to, how do you weigh all that while also trying to improve him this year so you have something to build on? And then I think that the Arnold story cannot be separated from the Kevin John story, who is, I think it is no coincidence that Arnold's return to the lineup, where he looked a lot more comfortable in getting to his check downs, things like that, directly coincides with having an experienced quarterbacks coach as his quarterbacks coach.
Yeah, you're right. And I'll take you back to my post game rant from the Fairfield Inn lobby with the orange wall behind us, which was weird. um, and that is, if you can get a little bit better going into Ole Miss, right, which they did, you get a little bit better going into Maine, which who knows what that's going to look like when they actually play the game on the field. And then you spend your open date getting a little bit better. And then you spend the week preparing for Missouri, getting a little bit better. All of a sudden, you've gone from here to here, and maybe nobody's even talking about it. Nobody's even noticing it, because you're supposed to go to Columbia, Missouri, and win that game. You're supposed to beat Maine 62-4, according to the scores we've seen. You're supposed to beat. You're supposed to play better or get better over your open date. You're supposed to go into the Grove and play an Ole Miss team that is missing its best player, its best offensive player. You're supposed to play them close or lead at halftime, right? And so these things are starting to come to fruition. We've seen incremental improvements out of the offensive line. I think, despite their finish, their absolutely catastrophic, disastrous finish. I don't care what the AP says. That was a disastrous finish, where you give up 6 sacks on your last 3 drives. But there was so much improvement before that. So you put Jackson Arnold into the mix. He's getting one-on-one coaching now from a guy who's an experienced quarterback coach. Maybe the team gets a little better. Maybe the team gets a little better next week. Maybe the team gets a little better in its open date. Maybe the team gets a little better at Missouri. So I think we may be seeing that turnaround that you're talking about, that you referenced in 2009. I think the team was 2009, or was it 2005? They were 2-3 at the turn or something like that. And then 2009, they lost a bunch of one-score games because of all those injuries. But you're right, both teams, and I asked Brent about those teams earlier this season, 05 and 09, ended up in minor bowls, but he said those were some of the most fun coach teams that he's ever had, most fun coaching he's ever had with the team, because they showed that second half of the season improvement. And I think there's a possibility that we may be seeing some of that out of this Oklahoma team now, especially with Jackson Arnold getting that coaching that you referenced and being a little better with the football, being a little more decisive, being a little more, understanding of where the first receiver should be, where the second receiver should be, and if they're not there, where the check down is. He showed that last week throughout the game, as well as some toughness that I think really endears his teammates to him, carrying the football 24 times. He had 104 yards or 107 yards rushing on like was it 15 carries? And the sack totals obviously bring that down to 24 carries for 39 yards, which is terrible. But just running with the football, he was fantastic. So that's the kind of improvement that I'm talking about. That's the kind of progress that you're looking for out of your guys.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because they've got, like we said, Maine this week. We'll preview Maine, but not preview Maine after we talk with Brady. You'll see what that looks like, obviously. Then they head to Mizzou, the open week, Bama, LSU to close. It's almost you get 2 weeks to prepare for Missouri with Maine being a fake bye week. Then you get 2 weeks to prepare for Alabama with the real bye week coming out of Missouri. That needs to be where Oklahoma makes the turn. And I'm not saying they need to win those 3 games to show improvement, but we know what it looks like. I think everyone who watched the game, whether you're covering it or watch it, knew how it felt at halftime in the Cotton Bowl, knew how it felt at halftime in Norman against both Tennessee and South Carolina. That's not what it was last week, which is improvement. So I know it's a lot of negative right now around Oklahoma football. And while I certainly have my opinions in the big picture and my concerns, I don't want to poo-poo on. There's 4 games left, and if you can show improvement, even if that doesn't translate to going 3-1 or anything crazy, I do think that's going to be really important to shaping what this offseason looks like. Who we're going to touch on Maine, we're going to touch on some of the injury updates, all that stuff in a minute. But first, we're going to link up with our good friend Brady Trantham. Take a step back. We're not previewing Maine, so we wanted to find Brady, the pulse of at least a diehard U fan, see how he is looking at this thing, because he's lived the other version of this, I think, where he's covering the Thunder, then he's feeling us out for like, what is the great Mrs. Hoover saying about this Thunder team? What are they feeling? We're just gonna do it in reverse next as we pilfer through, maybe serve as a therapy session for Brady on the other side here on the Sooners on SI podcast. Welcome back aboard, and we're joined by a very special guest. I don't know if we can label him as the curator of vibes around the fan base, because that's actually our good friend Matt Burton. Matt Burton does all the vibes. This is just the angriest man. No, I'm kidding. A good friend of us both, Brady Trantham, who does a bunch of stuff. You know him from Through the Keyhole, a fantastic Oklahoma football podcast. He also does some help with the franchise postgame show. You can find him around campus, just wandering the halls, asking, when will the Bud Wilkinson days come back and bestow upon me? All those things. The great Brady Trantham. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Guys, how are we doing? Thank you for letting me come on a legitimate podcast while I take a break from my funny. It's only funny when I'm talking, like when Peyton and Matt and Alan, Kenny all like chime in on Through the Keyhole. Like that's where like all the brains come in. But it's just it's a place for me to vent about OU football, like you said. But yeah, I'm very, very excited to be one of my favorite OU football podcasts that I listen to every time you guys put something out.
Well, Brady, this is old stuff for me and you, man. We used to
Yeah.
meet down at Blue and hook up with the Locked On Sooners podcast, and
Yeah, like
occasionally I'd pop in on the Keyhole podcast. I think I did one or two with you. I might be misremembering that, but yeah, man, we it's good to catch up. It's good to have you back on, certainly on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. I think you jumped on during the offseason after the Alamo Bowl because we were talking about basically the entire team and what to look forward to, what not to look forward to. And I think we were probably wrong on about everything you wanted to look forward to, unless it was, something about the defense. And yeah, like the old Inside OU days. I think that's what we called it back then when we started the
Yep.
podcast for the franchise. And we were either at Blue in Norman or we were at some suite in the stadium because Rufus Alexander, our co-host back then, would just hook us up with like, okay, we can just go get a private room in the stadium because that's what happens when your co-host is a former player. So, it's come a long way, but I'm glad to see that you're still in the podcast game, John.
Yeah, for now.
Now we just get kicked out of stadiums 3 hours on the dot.
What is that about? I've noticed.
What? We don't know.
It
I've
does
noticed
not
that
mean more in the
Yeah.
SEC. It absolutely, by God, does not mean more. If you're kicking your newspaper and writers and video people out 3 hours after the kickoff, it does not mean more. Come
Yeah,
on.
that's something that I've kind of noticed. I ran into you guys down at Auburn like a few hours before kickoff. I had a buddy that went with me there. I had a buddy that also went to the Ole Miss game, and apparently, like OU is technically a dry campus, but on game day, you can walk around and find beer stands like around every corner. Like you cannot go like 10 feet without knowing that you can buy water or beer for the low, low price of like $27. Auburn, I couldn't find anything. And he said that my buddy said the same thing about Ole Miss. So apparently it doesn't mean more for the media or the fans. It's very odd.
Yeah, I will say that the Grove pregame tailgate situation was mind-blowingly good.
Looked like Woodstock, like not the good one, but the chaotic one where some people died. But hopefully everybody was safe.
Yeah, we avoided any kind of stampeding for the most part, though. I was ready to just be like, "Hoove, I'm in my people. I'm going to see you, and don't worry about what smell comes back on my breath when I get to the press box." Because that's what I feel like I need to cover this team sometimes. A large drink of something that's not water, or what is it? Wax cup sweet tea. Is that what it was labeled as on the OU coaches show ahead of OU Texas? But Brady, as we sit here. It's Oklahoma's second of 3 bye weeks this year. They welcome in the Maine Black Bears, who have neither a real bear or I just hope they bring Bananas the fake bear in. So we're not going to be talking a ton of Maine. Hoove and I will talk about Maine here in a second. As you look back, these first 8 games, 4-4, offense is a tire fire, all that stuff. What are your just vibes with everything? Obviously, they need a new offensive coordinator, but let's just start at the top. We just got done talking to Hoove and I did about how this almost felt like a Brent Venables state of the program type, defend everything I'm doing sort of press conference. Where are you at with Venables here as he's kind of stumbling through year 3?
Wow. Like again, this is a legitimate OU football podcast with actual real journalists. So to your listeners that come here for like the insight from a journalist, what you're about to hear, like again, I'm just a fanboy. So I'm not a journalist. I'm not a media member. I'm just one of you listening.
Hey, do me a favor. Don't make me go out and find a bunch of the beep deletions.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, that's extra work for me, man. Don't make me do that.
I would never do that. I got all that out last night when we recorded through the keyhole, so we're all good. No, like Brent Venables having what was it, an hour long, 6-minute press conference yesterday. I felt bad for you guys. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And even in that press conference, he essentially got the vote of confidence question. I can't remember who asked it, but somebody asked him about, so do you have like conversations with Joe Castiglione? Has he given you like a vote of confidence? And, those questions only come about when things are about to get really bad for whomever is receiving the questions. And look, I give Brent Venables a lot of benefit of the doubt. Like one of them is just, I like him personally. I want him to do well. I didn't want him to leave the first time when he was the defensive coordinator in 2011 before Bob brought back Mike Stoops. I didn't want Brent to leave back then. He is a guy that when he talks, I can't help but get excited. I can't help but get motivated. And I can see his way of thinking. And I want that type of program. When he says that I want players that want to bleed crimson and cream and play for the Oklahoma Sooners, me as a fan, like I want that 100%. So everything he says makes me want to believe, but from what we've seen going back to 2022, last year with the success that he had going 10-3, beating Texas, and then this year, the other benefit of the doubt is that, every coach in the history of OU football since Bud Wilkinson, they didn't have to switch conferences. So that's a gigantic monkey wrench thrown into this entire equation whenever you're trying to think about coaching trajectory, like typically by year 2 or year 3, that like they are what they are. Well, not every coach switches conferences, let alone to the best conference in college football. So that has to amount to something. With the way the recruiting is going, it's hard to not be optimistic about the process moving forward under Brent Venables. But guys, like I got to be honest, him promoting Seth Luttrell and kind of coming off as someone who was just relegating the offense to, I know your name and I used to coach you when Bob was here, or I know you from the Bob era. Y'all just go over there and go coach offense. I'm going to go fix the defense, because that's what I was originally tasked with when I got hired here a few years ago, was to fix the defense. Y'all just go over there. We'll meet on Saturday. It's going to work because we've got an O and a U on our helmet. The offense is always going to be good. And then we saw what we saw under Seth Luttrell. It was a complete and utter disaster. And it was such a disaster that he fired Seth Luttrell. And John, I'll defer to you. Has there been an OU coordinator that was fired in his first year before the season started?
Not that I recall.
Yeah.
Remember there was Dick Winder was one of John Blake's coordinators, and
Mhm.
they switched offenses I think three times during the season. They went from kind of a veer to, I think it was a veer to more of a wishbone, to back to more of a pro style, and they switched quarterbacks every week, and it was just a disaster.
Yeah. So I mean, with all that said, like this is a disaster to the level that hasn't happened in this program, even during the dark days of the 90s. And so that is a gigantic black mark on his coaching resume, which already has a 6-7 season, which already has, like, even last year where there were you lose to Kansas on the road, you lose to OSU. Now, last year, Kansas and OSU were really good programs, like really good teams, top 25 teams. So there's really no shame in losing to good teams, but in the manner that they lost, it was a lot of the same little tiny mistakes that seemed to creep up every other game under Brent Venables, where tiny mistakes are made, questionable decisions are made, silly penalties occur. Like last year, it was just a bunch of sideline warnings on the coaching staffs, or you had assistant coaches blatantly getting penalized on third downs and extending drives, and all that falls back under Brent. So as much as I want to just hope that, all he has to do is just make the right hire at offensive coordinator this offseason, and he can course correct. The recruiting is there, the development apparently is there, especially on defense. Maybe it is on offense, maybe it isn't. That's a different story. But as much as I want to believe that, guys, we've not seen him make the right hire yet. We all predicted that Jeff Lebby was going to be the offensive coordinator when all that was going on. It was essentially handed to him. And Jeff Lebby is a guy that he was familiar with going back to his days at OU when he was the defensive coordinator. So as much as I want to believe that he can go out there and get like a GJ Kinney or a Colt Nicky, like whatever names you guys want to throw out there, fans or media, what have you, I've not seen evidence to support that Brent can A, do that, and B, even if he does, he's the head coach. So a lot of these tiny mistakes in games, like these questionable game plans, schemes, what have you on offense, are still going to be there. And so that kind of leaves me thinking that overall, I just don't think Brent's going to be the guy to win OU a national title. And so if that's what I believe, and just as a fan, well, then my next question is, what do you do next? Which is obviously move on from that coaching regime, but that's not realistic as it stands right now.
Yeah, Brady, let me ask you, in lieu of like a little correction, I want to modify something that you said. Oh, the previous coaches didn't have to worry about jumping into a new conference. John Blake jumped into the Big 12, went from the Big 8 to the Big 12, and the Big
That's
12,
true.
you'll remember, was from 96 to 2006, was arguably the best conference in the country. So the question is the similarity that exists. Blake couldn't get his way out of it. He couldn't swim his way out of that quagmire that he was in the middle of the Big 12. Can Brent be the guy to swim his way out of the quagmire in the SEC? Can he get it? Can he get Oklahoma? It is, which of these is more likely to happen? 2022s or 2023s, where they're going 6-7 and they barely make a bowl, or maybe this year they don't make a bowl, or a year when they're 10-2 and you look back and say they probably shouldn't have lost that game. They probably shouldn't have lost that game. Maybe in Texas' case, they probably shouldn't have won that game. Which of those is more likely for Brent, moving forward in the SEC?
Yeah, as much as I would love to say 2023, because I can see a fan having the logic of just hire the right offensive coordinator, retain some offensive players. You're going to bring in guys via the portal. You're going to bring in guys via recruiting. And if you just have that right course correction, you're going to see more success. You're going to see more wins. Well, the way that I look at it is in Brent's first year, whether it was in-game mistakes, coaching decisions, not having the right guys on defense, which we all know, that was basically the case. In that conference, in the Big 12, which isn't soft, the Big 12 isn't bad. It's not the ACC, but it's definitely a more navigable offense, or a navigable conference if you're OU and you have that talent. Well, Brent was losing games by one score in that reality. And now, with basically about the same mistakes, the same coaching decisions, or the same questionable schemes, and of course there's injuries. We understand that. But now in this conference, he's losing games by multiple scores. And that to me paints a much different picture than the optimistic fan who looks at 2022 and goes, hey, you lose Caleb Williams. Lincoln Riley leaving is such a weird monkey wrench. And like, how are we supposed to like bounce back from that? We all know the defense is bad. Brent gave everybody like 1 year grace period, but we lose all these games basically by one score outside of TCU in the Texas game. So if you just correct a few things, you should win 8, 9, maybe even 10 games. And that's exactly what they did the following year, beating Texas and then winning 10 games and it being in contention to get back to the conference championship. It's a much steeper hill to climb in the SEC because this is just a conference that is unforgivable and it shines a bright light on what you as a program either ignore or are deeply flawed at. And unless you look in the mirror and decide we can't ignore this any longer or we need to address this now, unless you do that, like there's just really no course correction to like hope for. It's just going to come down to, can Brent Venables do it? And I just don't think that he can, based on the evidence that we've seen of him as a head coach.
It feels like right now the development cycle of the team is going in reverse. Like year one, you don't have the guys that should be able to run your defense, so you get blown out a lot. Year two, you make the huge step forward and maybe you win a bunch of close games. You beat a Texas, it doesn't come back the other way against Kansas OSU. And then year three, some of that football happens and the turnover luck, all that swings back the other way, and you're in a bunch of one-score games. It's been the opposite of that. And my concern, Brady, is this, and you know this. Oklahoma, bare minimum, second most talented roster in the Big 12 every year. It's Oklahoma, it's Texas, it's everybody else. They may not be the best two teams, but they're the most talented rosters. That was the case still in 2022, even though those guys weren't running Venables' defense. Like, I think everyone just about in the conference would have switched personnel with Oklahoma. They would have coached them better or, had them in the ears. But you look at it, as long as Gabriel was healthy, they were only going to get blown out of the TCU game. They might have made it look more respectable. In 2023, they beat the team that's more talented than them, and then they lose to two teams that are way less talented than them on paper. And now that you're in the SEC, Oklahoma's never going to be the second most talented team in the SEC unless they start recruiting like Georgia, Alabama. Brent couldn't beat Kansas and Oklahoma State and make it to Arlington when he had the second most talented roster. What magically makes you think that now that you're playing against equal talent in a bunch of these games or a talent gulf that's not as far as Oklahoma to Kansas, like that he's going to overcome that's been my big concern, even with the offense totally like falling off the face of the earth, making it to where they're not in games.
Yeah, and like that's another part of this whole equation because I think people have this idea that insert magical perfect offensive coordinator here and you essentially like max out OU's offensive capability and you marry it with Brent Venables and the defensive acumen that he brings to the table. And no doubt, like he has improved the defense. It's a good defense. It is not elite. It's not close to elite, in my opinion. A lot of our like us throwing roses at the feet of the defense is relative to the fact that we've all had to experience what OU was defensively for the last 12 years. So like the improvements are there and it gives you the impression that there's even more like they can even climb higher as a defensive unit. So if you marry a good offensive coordinator with that should work. Well, as much as I don't really like Jeff Lebby and his system, there's no doubt that he's a good offensive coordinator. And what gives me pause moving forward about a potential hypothetical good offensive coordinator for the future is we all kind of predicted, whether we be fans or media, that Jeff Lebby likes to do this. He likes to go fast, quickly, like very fast, go, 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 go. Brent Venables is a defensive guy. How does that work if you go 3 and out in literally 22 earth seconds and your defense has been out there for dozens of snaps already or a few series already and they're tired and got to go back out there? And that reared its ugly head in 2022. I mean, they almost lost Bedlam in 2022 when they were up 28-0, and they almost lost that game because the offense could not get a first down. The defense was tired. And it reared its ugly head again in 2023 in those two losses where the defense set up OU in both the Kansas game and both the Oklahoma State game, multiple possessions of just score a touchdown and this game is over. You like OSU in the middle of the game, if you just extend your lead, that game is probably over considering OSU's strength is running the football and throwing jump balls. with Alan Bowman. They're not going to be able to do that. And that didn't work because the offense, the offense's relationship under Jeff Lebby with Brent Venables was not necessarily a good match. It just gives me the impression that in a tougher conference in the SEC with great talent on every roster. I mean, South Carolina was the quote unquote easiest game on OU schedule in conference going back to the offseason. Well, we all knew even then, well, they still have a few dudes that'll probably play in the NFL. Like that's the difference. Iowa State doesn't have NFL dudes. Texas Tech doesn't have NFL dudes, but the SEC, like the lower tier teams, certainly do. And so even if he finds some good offensive coordinator, I just don't have the confidence that it's going to be the marriage necessary to counterbalance some of Brent's flaws as a head coach and the decisions he likes to make as one of the defensive coordinators in terms of here, Makari Vickers hasn't played all year. Let's put him on the most important drive defensively on this crucial third down against Texas. And we see what happens. So just too many mistakes. I just too many mistakes and too difficult a conference to move forward. So, but again, I would love to be proved wrong. I'm often proven wrong. I'm not correct more than half the time, but I don't know. I just have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, Brady. Another quick dive into history. Back in 2008, when Kevin Wilson was given the green light to run up tempo, no huddle. I mean, 2007. Go back and watch. OU huddled behind the line of scrimmage. 2008, no huddle. It took the no huddle offense to another level. And I've said this before, when you're running a gimmick offense like the no huddle, hurry up back then, and you're doing it with the number 1 overall pick and the number 4 overall pick and the number 21 overall pick, and you've got a bunch of other guys that are going to the NFL in their careers, it looks really good. But in his infinite wisdom, Bob Stoops went to Brent Venables first and said, Brent, if we switch offenses, this is going to affect you. How do you feel about it? Brent said, let's do it, man. Let's do it. Go fast. Get as many points as you can. We'll still play defense. Here we are now. He's a head coach, and he's trying to weigh, do we want to go fast? Do we want to go slow? Do I need a new offensive coordinator who's got this philosophy or that philosophy? Has he advanced enough, do you think, as a football coach and as a head football coach, to make that right call, to make that, decision at some point? Because we saw Jeff Lebby running tempo when they were up against Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State almost came back. If Oklahoma State had had a pulse that night, they would have come back. So the question is, has Brent advanced enough in his career as a smart football coach, okay, but also as a head football coach? This is what's best for the program.
I think based on his resume, he absolutely we should all have the expectation that he has, because you don't spend the amount of time that he spent under Bill Snyder, Bob Stoops, Dabo Sweeney, like 3 very different types of programs, 3 very different types of cultures. You don't spend that much time under those guys. And then, well, he's a first-time head coach. He's not 35 years old. Like, he's in his 50s.
Yep.
He's been around the block. He should know better. He should know he should have, like, to me, he should have known in the offseason that this system offensively is not going to work, because Jackson Arnold, who we handed the program to, best quarterback coming out of high school, is struggling. And it's not because our defense is that awesome. Like, our defense is good, but this guy we said goodbye to Dylan Gabriel because we thought this guy was going to be even better. And yet all those reports and rumors we heard back in the offseason that we kind of shrugged off, now they kind of hold a lot of water. And so I should have had the expectation then that if something isn't working in the offseason, Brent needs to identify it and do something about it. And even if that means doing something unorthodox and going up to your offensive coordinator, who I no doubt believe that Brent loves Seth Luttrell, appreciates Seth Luttrell, and respects Seth Luttrell, and wanted to give him the time and the space to develop with a new roster of players to coach. It should have got to a point where he went up to him and basically said, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it shouldn't have taken until the post game of the Tennessee game to start saying that, yeah, we shouldn't be doing this, or I don't like that play design. I don't like the play in that situation on the goal line. It shouldn't have taken that long. And so we should have had those expectations for him going into this season. And I think because we're all still kind of new to this new Brent Venables led program, we didn't. But now moving forward, like I'm counting on you guys to be cutthroat, because if he doesn't make the right hire, we all know what that means in terms of the offensive coordinator moving forward.
Kind of a weird hypothetical. What if they had just promoted Matt Wells instead of Seth Luttrell, a guy that had worked with quarterbacks before? K-State's the 36th offense in total offense. I know that Matt Wells did a lot of help with the game management stuff that we talk about that had improved a little bit last year. Kind of a weird. It could end up being a sliding doors moment in the Brent Venables era of, if you wanted to go on staff, somewhat you might have picked the wrong guy that was on staff as far as elevating analysts a year ago.
I think that hypothetical is going to hold a lot more water in about 3 or 4 more weeks. So, assuming Jackson Arnold doesn't die, because behind this offensive line, who knows? But hopefully he's healthy. If he puts together 3 or 4 weeks of pretty good play, like we saw in the first half against Ole Miss, some of that is going to be because of what he talked to you guys about after he came back in against South Carolina, where he was like, "Yeah, it was like a big weight was lifted off my shoulder." He's no doubt playing freer. But I would also add to that, it's probably now because he's got a quarterbacks coach like talking to him on the sideline and sitting him down and saying, "Here's what you did great. Here's where you messed up. Here's what you can do in the future. They're going to throw this look at you. Here's what you need to look for now." So if he puts together 3 or 4 weeks like against Maine, Missouri, bye week, and then Alabama, whether or not OU wins those games or not, but if Jackson Arnold himself plays well, and you can point to like now, like he's got a QB coach. Well, then he can go back even further, like you said, Ryan, and said, maybe you should have promoted somebody else on staff in Matt Wells, who has experience coaching quarterbacks. Maybe that was the key to unlocking this offense, considering that the offensive line isn't going to be very good. And considering that not that we could have predicted any of this, all the receivers are going to get hurt. Well, you could have maxed out the offense with Jackson Arnold if you had someone sitting him down and coaching him. So that will be interesting in a few weeks to revisit, I think.
Interesting times for sure. Brady, before we get you out of here, and thank you again for hopping on. It's kind of one of the grand questions. Hoover and I are about to talk about this here in a second. Is for you, I know you have a very, very high standard for what this program is. When they step out of conference play this Maine team, considering everything that's happened so far this year, like what for you is like, this was a successful day on the offensive side of things. These are the 1, 2, 3 things I want to see from the defense, knowing that like if we have to talk about Maine, it's a disaster. The conversation is totally different. The rest of all that stuff, but the expectation that Oklahoma makes them look like an FCS team, like what are the finer details you want to see Saturday?
I mean, to say like go out there and take care of business. But what does that mean when you're a 4-4 team and kind of frankly not good? To me, like you're playing an inferior opponent, you're playing at home. The last time you played in Norman, it was an utter debacle of a disaster by the 9:40 mark of the first quarter. So, I mean, from that standpoint, put on a good show for your home fans that are still supporting you. I would say on defense, they haven't forced a turnover in since the Texas game, right? Since the Billy Bowman interception. And I always forget they did recover a fumble against Ole Miss, but that was the offense because it was on the same play. But yeah, go out there and force a few turnovers and just at least get the muscle memory back of you are a good defense. You can be a game breaking defense in terms of the amount of guys on that defense that can basically take the football away, because they're going to need to remember that when they go on the road against Columbia or again in Columbia and they play Alabama and play LSU. They need to remember that they can force turnovers. So force 2 or 3 turnovers. You force 6 against Temple. Let's see if you can do something similar to that again. And on offense, really, I think it just comes down to whatever combination of guys is able to go on the offensive line, considering Sexton is out for a while, according to Brent Venables. Whoever is out there, you cannot let Jackson Arnold get hit a lot. You just cannot let him get really, frankly, at all. Knowing full well that Spencer Brown might play, I don't know what that means because he couldn't really block Temple edge rushers. So I hesitate to say like no sacks at all. So I'll be realistic and say it should be under no more than a sack. I'll give you 1, but keep Jackson Arnold upright so that he can scan the field, and then we can actually find out, like, can he read the defense? Can he scan the field? Can he deliver the football? We saw glimpses of that in the first half against Ole Miss. We didn't get a chance to see him really do it in the second half because of the offensive line. So It comes down to the big guys up front. Do your job. Don't let Maine stunt on you like this.
Literally, don't let them stunt and twist. That would be
Yeah.
a bad thing, a very bad thing. Brady, thank you for hopping on. I know it was a little short notice because I was supposed to book you last week and I just didn't because I'm an idiot. And thank you for always letting me bum at your tailgate. That's always helpful when I have 3 hours to kill between my radio shift getting done and the game starting. And who doesn't want to sit next to me that long? Because no one should. That's bad for group morale.
No, of course, guys. Like I said, it's one of my favorite OU podcasts to listen to. I always listen to your show whenever you guys put it out. Yeah, it's a honor to be on. Thank you for inviting me on. And yeah, John, I apologize. I usually tell Ryan to tell you that I'm sorry that when he comes up to the press box, if he does have like a smell to him in terms of like, oh, like that's not Gatorade, like that's on me. I am a walking temptress when it comes to game day environment.
You can't hide the barbecue smoke. That's what I smell on Ryan. The kid is the barbecue smoke. So I get it. Totally get it.
We've always said that Brady Trantham is the siren of Oklahoma football. He's just out there trying to draw us into the cliffs. That's what he does. So
I've got John to come to a tailgate once, and I mean that was a reward in and of itself. So
Good breakfast burritos. As I remember, it was an 11 a.m. kick.
wow, that'll narrow it down.
I know.
Which game? Brady, thanks a bunch, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. That's Brady Trantham through the keyhole. Franchise post game. You know the drill. Go say what's up. We appreciate you, Mr. Trantham.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy.
We'll be right back after this, previewing the Black Bears of Maine, who I did some counting. Who here's the only stat you get: 8 of them hail from Maine. That's all I got on the Maine Black Bears. We'll break them down next. Well, I hope everyone feels better after talking with Brady. No, I'm kidding. We love Brady. We love Brady a lot. And there's a lot of doom and gloom around things right now. I think everyone in the fan base, that's what makes it so interesting, Hoove, the Brent Venables of it all, because we've seen Jimbo Fisher, his tail end at Florida State. It was like the Seminole fans were like, good riddance, get rid of this guy. Same with like a Dan Mullen at Florida. I don't think you're going to have that with Oklahoma fans. I think everyone wants this to work a lot. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, they're not going to get a ton of guys back readily from injuries to like start making those steps, Hoove, that we've talked about here as far as what they can do to turn this thing around. Maybe make you feel just a smidge better going into the offseason. Brent Venables he said that Jacob Sexton's going to be out for, quote, a while. He didn't have an update on if Jake Taylor was going to be back in, if Deion Burks was going to be back in the lineup. He also mentioned Gentry Williams out for the season. I don't know if that's ever been said on the record. I think it's been felt out and talked about the way, but I don't know if anyone from Oklahoma has said Gentry Williams out for the season on the record. He also talked about like Des Malone being banged up in practice, which I don't know how he doesn't appear on the injury report if he's banged up in practice. I guess they never were concerned he was not going to play, but whatever. Sorry, availability report. Macari Vickers being banged up. So that leads to, I guess the big news that Isaiah Autry-Dent's going to get the call up from the scout team up into the 2 deep for Oklahoma. Don't know what that looks like along the offensive line, but that's the injury setup, Hoove, as we go into this main game. I asked Brady this. What's the checklist other than domination of things you're looking for? Let's start on the offensive side, Hoove. What's your checklist? What are you looking for a successful outing against the Black Bears?
I need to see the offensive line give up 0 sacks would be ideal. Realistically, no more than 2. I think Brady referenced 1. That's may not be realistic. And then I want to see 6 yards of carry. I want to see the Oklahoma offensive line come out and just mash this, 63 scholarship, FCS, Division I AA, 240, 250, 260 pound defensive line, right? I want to see Oklahoma get out. I want to see Javonte Barnes get over 100 yards. I want to see the team, the offense as a team, get over 200 yards on the ground. Anything less, and we're going back to Temple, right? Where it's, they scored 51 points, but they really didn't dominate the line of scrimmage. They really didn't look that good. They scored 51, but it was kind of a mirage. If we come out of this game saying that stuff again, then all bets are off for the last 3 games of the season.
Yeah, it's a different conversation because coming out of Temple, it was like, hey, they're missing this guy, they're missing this guy, they're missing this guy. So it was going, are they going to have enough time by Tennessee to get everyone healthy and all that? At this point, the injuries are the injuries along the offensive line. We get it. We all watch it. So What does those combinations look like? For me, it's about if Arnold doesn't get to 300 yards, it needs to be because Arnold didn't get to 300 total yards of offense because he was pulled because Oklahoma was up by so much.
Mhm.
Similar with like, can a receiver go over 100? Can they find Brennan Thompson for 2 or 3 of those explosives and just get him going? If it's because they spread out and they completed passes to like 9 different receivers, then great. If that stuff you see like against the Temples of the world, but I want to see him force feed somebody and say, you got Javonte Barnes going on the ground. Continue that against Maine because you're going to need him in Columbia in 2 weeks. But pick a wide receiver and get somebody going and say, Oklahoma has a vertical threat that Missouri has to think for half a second about when they start game planning. You flip it over. I think the defense is even a little bit more straightforward, Hoove. Just create a couple turnovers. That's kind of what I'm writing about on Thursday. It'll be up on the site, oklahomasooners.com. I think part of why they didn't force turnovers against South Carolina is because South Carolina went into the turtle really, really quick and didn't put Lenora Sellers in a spot to turn the ball over. Jackson Dart is just a really good quarterback, but the defense hasn't forced a turnover. The defense since Texas, I want to see them get back on the right side of things, on the correct side, as they need to force a couple of turnovers if they're going to win any of these games the rest of the year. Not
Put
maybe.
JJ Hester out at safety. He knows how to get the ball out.
I guess.
That was
Hey,
impressive.
the in press box PA kept trying to force Reggie Powers on us when it was definitely JJ Hester. So
those double numbers, those double offense and defense numbers are always confounding to the visiting press box PA. I'm with you on the turnovers. I want to see at least 2. But if you can get 3 or 4, get aggressive. Get aggressive and take a chance and get the football out. At the same time, I want to see him get aggressive, but I also want to see a 0 on the scoreboard. There is no way on God's green earth, Maine, which has been their record is 4-4. Their 4 losses are all by double digits. They have shown the ability to score this year on FCS teams. They beat the number 3 or number 5 ranked Villanova team earlier in the season, upset them, and 3 of their 4 wins have been by double digits. So they do know how to move the football, and that's on against FCS teams. I want to see Oklahoma pitch a shutout. I want to see 0 points on the scoreboard. We saw Temple. We saw Temple get a field goal, and that was like this big, huge letdown for the defense. Oh, we gave up 3 points. Go out there and flex your muscles and give Missouri a reason to come into this game next week and say, oh crap, they might be coming back.
Yeah, and I want to see more than anything, all the backups in the second half. I want to see much like Temple, every freshman who has not really played a ton, whether they played a huge role or not. I wrote about David Stone on Wednesday, a guy that right now he's got the big cast on his left wrist and stuff like that. So I understand if he's a little bit more limited, but Jaden Jackson, let's see what David Stone. Let's see some of those younger safeties that Bob Brisbillo asked about. Let's see along the offensive line, Eugene Brooks and Eddie Pierre-Louis and Isaiah Autry-Dent, even not from the jump, but in the second half, I want to see all those guys start to get those reps and then make the decision. You can see, okay, is this the group along the offensive line you're going with heading into Columbia, or does an Eddie Pierre-Louis or an Isaiah Autry-Dent, did any of those guys get thrown in there and actually play so well that you're giving them a look? This is the spot to do it here with it being Maine. So I'll be interested to see what it all shakes out with. It should be a romp, but nothing's a given with this team, I guess, this year.
62-4. That's the number that you're searching for. And it better not be 4 because that means you've given up 2 safeties. But that's the average score that Oklahoma has put on the scoreboard in its 7 games against FCS opponents in history. 7 times they've played this level of team. The average score is 62-4. So how about like a nice 51-0?
That I don't think anyone would be too mad about that. Especially, here's the weird thing. It's unfair to everybody. When the defense gets a turnover, they probably need to score off of it because I don't think anyone's going to care if the offense gets a 20-yard scoring drive. Yeah. But they need that. They need that. So that'll be Saturday, 1:30. It's the SEC Network Plus / ESPN Plus designation on
Good luck finding that one
on the game notes. So good luck there. We'll be there. Bryce will be there. All that fun stuff. Be sure you're locked in with us, oklahomasooners.com. All of our content all throughout the week, from a very insightful Brent Venables press conference. We'll have the live blog up there, all of our pregame content, all that stuff per huge. Before we dip out, though, Hoove, as is the rule, you hold a media day, we talk about you. Simple as that. We did that with the men last week, the Sooner men, Porter Moser's crew. On Monday, it was women's basketball media day. Got to talk with Jenny Baranczyk and everything for the top 10 Sooners. And what a joy it always is talking with Jenny Baranczyk. A lot made about Reagan Beers, obviously, your All-American center coming in from Oregon State. I was really interested with Liz Scott, what she's kind of been up to as she steps back into the lineup this year after her injury a year ago that cost her the year. But none of that is the thing that stood out to me, John. It was this, a question I asked Jenny Baranczyk. She, in the middle of another answer, had said that this team doesn't feel pressure, that they don't feel the outside pressure of being a top 10 team. They don't carry that with them every day in practice. So I was curious of, hey, the last couple of years you've been in Big 12 championship fights, right? Back to back. You split it with Texas 2 years ago, won it the regular season, all that stuff. How did maybe being in night to night battles where one loss redoes all the ranking, how does that help with the mentality of not being bothered by that? And Jenny was like, yeah, that's great, but this is Oklahoma. You don't get to be an underdog at Oklahoma, so I'm not going to walk in there and tell them that they're an underdog, which is just like, it makes sense. I think the fan base like hearing that. Brent Venables likes playing the underdog card. Patty Gasso loves playing. Like, very recently in the last 5 to 10 years, she's had to go, okay, we can't really do the underdog thing anymore. I get that. It's kind of funny. I appreciate the edge that Jenny Baranczyk has to take over an OU women's basketball program that if you had said that in like 09, 010, yes, they can't play the underdog. She could have played the underdog when she kind of took over the program coming out of the COVID where they only had 6 players, all that stuff. And she's like, no, screw that. I think that's the right mentality for a coach, especially as they tackle what is an absolute bear, which is the SEC schedule.
I'm looking forward to seeing how they do in the SEC because the Big 12 wasn't the most. The Big 12 always had a team at the top or two at the top, which was like a stone cold assassin, right? You had no chance. And what does Jenny do? She comes in here in her last 2 years and wins the league, the regular season conference championship. Is stunningly impressive. She might be the second best coach on the campus right now. When you're saying this is Oklahoma, we're not underdogs. We're OU. You start to see like Brent Venables' veins on his neck start to pop out from back in the day, and he's screaming at somebody and he's got the spittle going out, and you're wondering, hey, maybe the football team can kind of catch on that vibe a little bit, or because what Patty Gasso has done in softball, maybe they can follow that example a little bit. I don't know. If it hasn't happened yet, it might not happen.
The official rankings are somewhere with Patty, KJ, Mark Williams, Jenny. Is that where she slides in after that?
I don't know. The job that she's done the last couple of years might elevate her over. I know Mark Williams has 7 national championships, but just in terms of where they're at right now in the hierarchy, she might be number 2, number 3.
And Skip's
I'll give you KJ. I'll give you KJ for sure.
Yeah.
So that's so it's Patty, KJ, and then Jenny. Your top 3 coaches on this campus are all in women's sports.
Yeah, you've got that.
Like, all females as well.
Yeah, Skip's made a national championship in there somewhere. So I think I'd go. I think I'd feel pretty comfortable with Patty, KJ, Jenny. Yeah, I think that we'll that'll be coming to the site, OklahomaSooners.si.com. Probably late June, early July. We'll do our official OU coach rankings. We'll pick through it, and we'll be sure to make extensive podcasts out of that so that Hoove can be responsible for sparking another national championship run for somebody across campus. Right. Whoever ends up at the bottom of that list. We're gonna have a big softball media day on next Monday, okay? Monday of Missouri week. So be sure you got your eyes to the YouTube. You got your eyes to OklahomaSooners.si.com. I will not be throwing it in. I will be writing immediately multiple stories as soon as I'm done with that, all the way up until the point that I have to go to football press conferences that night on Monday. So there'll be a ton of softball content too. But the women got going on Tuesday night with a big, massive exhibition win. The men had their red-white scrimmage on Wednesday night, and then they both kind of get underway. The men are off first, I believe, or start off first Monday night against Lindenwood next Monday. So the next time we all convene here on the Sooners on the Side podcast, we will have regular season basketball games to talk about, which is a scary statement that you just saw the look that Hoove gave. I have literal anxiety right now, someone that's responsible for a lot of that stuff. So that's good. We're in a good spot mentally.
Yeah, we got a few weeks of football basketball crossover with a little bit of softball sprinkled in. We can handle it. Because there's every possibility this football team ain't going to a bowl game, so that crossover could be really short.
We can handle it, but if you're watching on the YouTube, this stress ball that I've got, we can handle it, but I'll be pumping it, baby. Just like, oh my gosh. So a ton to be with us for, as always. Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. Live blog, post-game coverage, everything from Maine. Monday night, we'll have takeaways from the OU men's basketball opener. Same thing when the women get going. Same thing with softball, all that stuff. Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. The next you'll hear from Hoover and I will be Saturday post-game as we wrap up everything from the Sooners and the Black Bears for the first time ever on the gridiron. Fire me up. Bananas T-Bear, a real bear, existed at some point with a hell of a photo for the Maine archives. Appreciate that. And then we'll be back next Thursday to really have probably a 4-hour podcast to catch up with everything that will have happened, previewing Missouri, Oklahoma basketball, softball, so much stuff, so little time. So come on back next Thursday. Until then, be sure you're following us all the normal places. At Sooners on SI is the big catch-all if you're a Twitter person. Hoove is at Johnny Hoover. I'm at _Ryan Chapman. Randall Sweet 5. Bryce is at McKinnis Bryce, and Dakota's at Dakota Gregory. Dakota held a lemur today as he was working. We are the only website on this whole damn planet that is bringing you Oklahoma football content while holding lemurs in between that. So be sure you're following Dakota. I have no idea what Dakota gets up to on a daily basis. That's why you got to follow him on Twitter at Dakota Gregory. He does a great job there. But until next Thursday, until Saturday for the post-game pod, we will talk to you guys then.